Disclaimer: the following story contains descriptions of real-life hauntings, disturbing events, and paranormal investigations. While based on actual reports and widely documented cases, some elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. Listener discretion is advised. These stories are not for the faint of heart, especially those sensitive to themes of violence, possession, or unexplained phenomena. Proceed with caution and maybe keep a light on. When you think of horror movies, your mind might immediately leap to over-the-top fiction, ghosts slamming doors, spirits whispering from shadowy corners, and demonic forces wreaking havoc on innocent families. But what if some of those stories weren't born purely from a screenwriter's imagination? What if the horror lurking behind some of the scariest films ever made was based on true events, real houses, real people, real terror? That's exactly what we're diving into in this chilling journey through 4 of the most infamous real-life haunted houses that inspired blockbuster horror movies. From creaking floorboards and unexplained cold spots to full-blown possessions and exorcisms, these homes have been at the center of stories that sparked national headlines and captivated the world. The paranormal isn't just a Hollywood fantasy for some, it's a terrifying reality they've lived through. Their experiences weren't scripted, rehearsed, or acted. They were raw, chaotic, and often never fully understood. And whether you believe in ghosts or not, you can't deny the eerie similarities between the accounts of those who lived through the events and the stories that appeared on the big screen. In this hour-long journey, we'll peel back the cinematic layers and expose the dark truths behind 4 haunted houses that became legends. We'll begin with one of the most widely recognized haunted homes in American history, the Amityville House. The very name sends a shiver down the spine of anyone even vaguely familiar with horror films. The real-life events that took place at 112 Ocean Avenue were so disturbing that they not only led to best-selling books and movies, but they also triggered nationwide debates on whether the paranormal is real. Then we'll travel to a quiet farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island, where the Perron family endured years of torment from unseen forces. Their story became the foundation of The Conjuring, and it's one of the most terrifying accounts ever recorded. With the involvement of world-famous paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, this case laid the groundwork for what would become an entire horror film universe. Next, we'll cross the ocean to England, where a seemingly ordinary council house in Enfield became the site of one of the most heavily documented and controversial poltergeist cases in history. The events that unfolded there were not only witnessed by the family, but also by journalists, investigators, and skeptics. Yet, to this day, many questions remain unanswered. This haunting formed the basis of The Conjuring 2, but as you'll hear, the reality may have been even more disturbing than what was shown on screen. Lastly, we'll uncover the terrifying history of a former funeral home in Connecticut that became the living nightmare of the Snedeker family. Their home wasn't just haunted, it was a place where evil seemed to feed on grief and trauma. Their ordeal, which included claims of demonic forces and dark rituals, was so extreme that it became the inspiration for The Haunting in Connecticut. Throughout this exploration, we won't just tell ghost stories. We'll delve into the psychological, cultural, and spiritual implications of these haunted places. Were these manifestations the result of trauma and imagination, or did these families genuinely encounter something supernatural? And how much did Hollywood alter these tales for shock value? These stories have haunted the public imagination for decades. They've become more than just scary tales told in the dark. They've sparked books, documentaries, podcasts, and passionate debates between believers and skeptics. But tonight, we focus on the people who lived through them, the investigators who tried to make sense of the madness, and the lingering presence that some say still resides within those walls. So, turn off the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself. Because these aren't just ghost stories. These are real haunted houses, and what happened inside them may never fully be explained. Nestled in a quiet, upscale neighborhood in Long Island, New York, stands a house that has become one of the most iconic and controversial haunted locations in the world, 112 Ocean Avenue, also known as the Amityville House. At first glance, the house appears charming, with its Dutch colonial design, large front lawn, and peaceful riverside backdrop. But beneath its picturesque exterior lies a dark and disturbing past that still chills those who dare to explore it. The events that unfolded inside this home in the mid-1970s would shock the nation and inspire one of the most well-known horror films of all time, the Amityville Horror. The nightmare began on November 13, 1974, when 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. took a rifle and murdered his entire family while they slept. His parents, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters were all found shot execution-style in their beds. DeFeo initially claimed he discovered the bodies himself, but soon confessed to the killings. The question was why. Though he gave several inconsistent explanations, including hearing voices commanding him to commit the murders, no clear motive was ever confirmed. It wasn't just the brutality of the murders that stunned the public, it was the eerie calm with which they had been executed. There were no signs of a struggle. None of the victims seemed to have awakened during the shootings. And that silence lingered in the home, as though something else, something beyond comprehension, had been present that night. 13 months after the murders, in December 1975, George and Kathy Lutz purchased the house at a reduced price, fully aware of its gruesome history. They moved in with their 3 children, optimistic that they could start a new life. But what followed was 28 days of horror they would never forget. From the moment they settled in, strange occurrences began to unfold. Doors would slam shut on their own, foul odors would waft through empty rooms, and inexplicable cold spots would appear. George began waking up at 3:15 a.m. every night, the exact time the DeFeo murders had occurred. The family reported hearing voices, disembodied footsteps, and even seeing demonic figures. Perhaps the most terrifying experiences involved the children. One of them reportedly befriended an invisible entity named Jody, who appeared as a pig-like creature with glowing red eyes. Kathy claimed to have been levitated from her bed, and George described witnessing his wife's face transform into something unrecognizable, aged and monstrous, before returning to normal. These terrifying experiences eventually drove the family from the house in less than a month. The Lutzes contacted famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, who conducted their own investigation of the house. Lorraine claimed she sensed a powerful demonic presence in the basement. A priest who attempted to bless the house reportedly heard a deep, inhuman voice growl, "Get out," and he later suffered a series of unexplained health issues. The house quickly became a media sensation. Reporters, skeptics, and ghost hunters descended upon it, hoping to catch a glimpse of the paranormal. The story was picked up by author Jay Anson, who penned the Amityville Horror, a best-selling book that was later adapted into a major motion picture in 1979, and eventually, an entire film franchise. However, controversy soon followed. Critics accused the Lutz family of fabricating the haunting for financial gain. Skeptics noted inconsistencies in their stories and questioned why no previous or future owners of the house reported any supernatural activity. Lawsuits were filed, friendships dissolved, and the truth became tangled in a web of media hype, personal agendas, and public fascination. Still, many believe the Lutzes were telling the truth, or at least, that something profoundly disturbing happened in that house during those 28 days. To this day, the Amityville house stands as a symbol of modern American horror. The original address was changed to deter thrill seekers, and the house has changed ownership several times. But no matter how many times the walls are repainted or the floors remodeled, the house's reputation remains. Whether you believe in the Lutz family story or not, there's no denying the house's cultural and psychological impact. It became more than just a place where a horrific crime occurred. It became a canvas for fear itself, a location where reality and nightmare blurred into one. As we leave Amityville behind and move toward the next haunting, remember this: every story has layers. And sometimes, the scariest part isn't whether ghosts are real. It's the idea that people, in the grip of something invisible, can lose their sanity and destroy everything around them. In the early 1970s, the Perron family moved into what they believed would be their dream home, a charming, centuries-old farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island. With its rustic appeal and wide-open land, The house seemed perfect for the growing family of 7. Carolyn and Roger Perron were seeking peace and a place for their 5 daughters to grow up far from the noise of city life. But what they found was far from tranquil. Instead, they stepped into one of the most infamous hauntings ever documented, a story so chilling it became the foundation for the first Conjuring film. The farmhouse, built in 1736, was known as the Old Arnold Estate. Before the Perrons even moved in, the property carried a dark history. Multiple deaths, suicides, drownings, and tragic accidents were associated with the house and its land. But the Perrons were unaware of most of this when they arrived. It didn't take long for strange things to begin. At first, the occurrences were minor. Brooms moved from one room to another, small objects disappeared, doors creaked open slowly by themselves. The family even joked that their home had friendly ghosts. But that lighthearted attitude would soon change. It was Carolyn Perron who first began to feel something more sinister. She noticed the smells of rotting flesh in the air, strange cold drafts that seemed to move independently, and voices whispering in empty rooms. Lights would flicker or go out completely, even when there was no power issue. The spirits seemed to focus on her, and over time, their presence grew stronger, more hostile. She would wake up with bruises she couldn't explain. The girls began seeing full apparitions, some harmless, others threatening. One daughter described seeing a ghostly man with a crooked neck watching her sleep. Another saw a little boy crying in the corner. Eventually, the Perrons learned about a woman named Bathsheba Sherman, a supposed witch who had lived in the area during the 1800s. Legend had it that Bathsheba had sacrificed her own child in a demonic ritual and cursed the land before hanging herself from a tree behind the house. Whether or not this was historically accurate remains debated, but the Perrons became convinced that Bathsheba's spirit remained in the house, and that she had latched onto Carolyn. The hauntings escalated, growing violent. Carolyn reported being thrown across a room by an unseen force and even claimed that Bathsheba had tried to possess her. Desperate, the family reached out to renowned paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens, already known for their work on cases like Annabelle and Amityville, agreed to investigate the Perron haunting. Lorraine, a clairvoyant, said she sensed overwhelming evil in the home and believed Bathsheba was, in fact, a powerful demonic entity. The Warrens attempted a seance, hoping to sever the connection between Bathsheba and Carolyn. But during the ritual, Carolyn became possessed, speaking in tongues and contorting in unnatural ways. Roger, fearing for his wife's safety, intervened and ended the session. The Perrons didn't ask for an exorcism, nor did they immediately move out. They remained in the house for nearly 10 years, enduring the haunting out of financial necessity. Eventually, they were able to relocate, and only after leaving did the family begin to share their story publicly. Andrea Perron, the eldest daughter, later authored a 3-volume book series titled House of Darkness, House of Light, detailing their horrifying experiences in full. When James Wan directed The Conjuring in 2013, he based the story closely on the Perron family's accounts and the Warrens' investigation. While the movie dramatized certain elements and changed timelines, many of the core details, the possession, the seances, the violent hauntings, came straight from the Perrons themselves. The film reignited public interest in the case and turned the quiet farmhouse into a paranormal pilgrimage site. Even today, visitors report strange activity in the house. The current owners have opened the property for overnight investigations and ghost tours. Footsteps are still heard. Shadows still move. Some claim that Bathsheba's influence has never truly left. But one thing is certain, the terror the Perrons experienced wasn't just a story for the screen. It was their real life, night after night, for nearly a decade. The question remains, what force lingered in that house, capable of tormenting an entire family and leaving scars that lasted for generations? The Perron haunting stands as one of the most chilling and well-documented cases in paranormal history, not just because of what was seen, but because of what couldn't be explained. In the late 1970s, a modest council house at 284 Green Street in Enfield, North London, became the epicenter of one of the most debated and documented hauntings in British history. This wasn't a centuries-old estate tucked away in the countryside. It was a working-class, government-provided home, a place where the Hodgson family hoped to live peacefully. Instead, what unfolded inside those walls would not only terrify them, but also spark global fascination, becoming the inspiration behind The Conjuring 2 and countless documentaries, books, and debates. The haunting began in August 1977, when single mother Peggy Hodgson reported strange noises and bizarre occurrences inside her home. Her 4 children, Margaret, Janet, Johnny, and Billy, began experiencing strange disturbances. Furniture moved on its own, knocking sounds echoed through the rooms, and toys flew across the floor. At first, Peggy thought her children might be playing pranks. But when a heavy chest of drawers slid across the room by itself and her daughter Janet seemed to be at the center of most incidents, she grew genuinely afraid. The most chilling aspect of the haunting was Janet's apparent possession. At just 11 years old, she began speaking in deep, guttural voices that were nothing like her own. These voices claimed to be different entities, including a man named Bill Wilkins, who allegedly died in the house years before. "Just before I died, I went blind," the voice rasped from Janet's throat during one session. "Then I had a hemorrhage, and I fell asleep and died in the chair in the corner downstairs." Researchers later confirmed that a man named Bill Wilkins had, indeed, died in the house under similar circumstances, lending eerie credibility to the claims. The activity escalated quickly. Witnesses, including neighbors, journalists, and even police officers, reported seeing furniture levitate, beds shake violently, and items fly across rooms without explanation. A policewoman present during one visit signed a statement confirming she saw a chair slide 4 feet across the floor unaided. Photographs taken by investigators showed Janet being thrown from her bed, midair, with a look of fear etched on her face. But perhaps the most famous moments were the audio recordings, unsettling tapes where Janet, seemingly in a trance, spoke in the voices of multiple spirits, sometimes for hours at a time. Paranormal investigators from the Society for Psychical Research, SPR, including Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfair, spent months documenting the phenomena. They captured hundreds of hours of audio and wrote detailed reports on the case. Grosse, who lost his own daughter shortly before the case began, became deeply emotionally invested in the family and believed the haunting was genuine. However, skeptics soon began to voice concerns. Some accused the Hodgson children, particularly Janet, of faking parts of the activity. There were moments when she admitted to staging events, saying she wanted to test the investigators. Critics pounced on these admissions, claiming the entire haunting was a hoax. But believers argue that while some incidents may have been exaggerated, the core events, especially those witnessed by independent sources, defied logical explanation. Janet herself has maintained for years that while she did play some pranks, most of the events were real and terrifying. "I didn't always feel like I was in control," she said in later interviews. "Sometimes I felt like someone else was inside me." In 2016, The Conjuring 2 dramatized the Enfield poltergeist story for a new generation, focusing on the Warrens' brief but notable involvement. Although Ed and Lorraine Warren's actual time in Enfield was limited compared to the investigators from the SPR, the film brought the case into mainstream awareness and reignited global interest. While some criticized the movie for fictionalizing key elements, others appreciated how it captured the fear, confusion, and family trauma at the heart of the haunting. To this day, the Enfield case remains controversial. It's one of the most well-documented poltergeist stories in modern history, yet it sits at the intersection of belief and skepticism. Was the haunting a cry for attention from children in a broken household, or was it truly the work of malevolent spirits? The photographs, recordings, and eyewitness accounts still stir debate among paranormal researchers. The house at 284 Green Street still stands. New families have moved in and reported nothing unusual. But those who lived through the haunting, especially Janet and her siblings, carry its scars. Whether real or imagined, what happened in Enfield left a lasting impression, and it remains one of the most compelling ghost stories of the 20th century. In 1986, the Snedeker family relocated to Southington, Connecticut, in search of a fresh start. Their teenage son was battling Hodgkin's lymphoma, and they needed to be closer to the hospital where he was receiving intensive treatment. After discovering a large, affordable rental home near the facility, the Snedekers quickly moved in, grateful for the convenience and space. But they had no idea that the house they had just occupied had a gruesome past. What started as a hopeful move for healing would descend into a waking nightmare, later inspiring the film The Haunting in Connecticut. Shortly after settling in, the family began noticing disturbing oddities throughout the home. The basement, which they converted into bedrooms, felt oppressively cold, heavy, almost alive with something unseen. They eventually discovered that the house had once operated as a funeral home. The basement rooms, where their son now slept, had been used to embalm corpses. Hidden cabinets, gurneys, tools, and even a body lift remained tucked away in the shadows, remnants of a time meant to be forgotten. The strange occurrences escalated rapidly. Matt, the oldest son, was the first to experience them. He reported seeing shadowy figures, hearing whispering voices, and witnessing objects move on their own. His behavior changed. Once reserved, he grew agitated, aggressive, and unpredictable. At first, his parents attributed it to the stress of cancer treatment. But when other family members began to experience disturbing phenomena, they realized something darker was at play. Carmen, the mother, claimed to hear eerie footsteps when no one was home. Crucifixes vanished from walls. Rosaries snapped into pieces. There were voices, sometimes gentle, sometimes threatening. The younger children spoke of a man with long black hair who would appear in the corners of their rooms, watching. The family dog would bark violently at empty spaces. The smell of decay and rot would come and go without explanation. The most terrifying accounts involved physical attacks. Carmen said she was sexually assaulted by an unseen force while sleeping. Matt described being held down, unable to move, while something cold and hateful pressed against him. The family became desperate, and in fear, they turned to renowned demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren for help. The Warrens, no strangers to malevolent hauntings, claimed the house was not only inhabited by spirits, but by a demonic presence that had been awakened by the family's arrival. According to the Warrens, the funeral home had been the site of necromantic rituals. They believed that former workers had used the corpses for dark purposes, opening spiritual doorways that allowed malevolent forces to enter. Lorraine, using her clairvoyant abilities, said she felt an overwhelming evil in the basement, unlike anything she had encountered before. Ed, during his investigation, declared the house a gateway for hell. The Warrens brought in a Catholic priest to perform a full exorcism. After the ritual, the activity reportedly ceased. The family later moved away, and Carmen went on to speak publicly about their experiences, appearing on talk shows and in documentaries. Their story was later adapted into the 2009 film The Haunting in Connecticut. While the movie took significant creative liberties, the core of the story, the trauma, the funeral home, the demonic oppression, was drawn directly from the Snedekers' account. However, like many paranormal stories, this one wasn't without controversy. Author Ray Garton, who was hired to write the book in a dark place based on the family's experiences, later claimed the Warrens had encouraged him to embellish or even invent certain aspects of the haunting. He stated that the family members' stories were inconsistent and contradictory. This cast doubt over the authenticity of the haunting in the eyes of skeptics. Still, others argue that even if some details were exaggerated, the core experiences of the Snedekers remain valid. Trauma and supernatural encounters are often messy, unexplainable, and filled with conflicting memories. Supporters believe that the suffering the family endured was real, whether caused by spiritual forces or something psychological. Today, the house still stands, and other tenants have come and gone, most without reporting similar activity. But for the Snedekers, the memories remain vivid. Their brief time in that house left emotional and spiritual scars that they carry to this day. Was the house truly haunted by demonic entities? Or was the suffering and stress of illness, financial strain, and grief powerful enough to manifest a different kind of horror? Regardless of the answer, the Snedeker house became a symbol of how the past can bleed into the present and how some houses hold on to more than just memories. When you step back and look at the Amityville house, the Perron farmhouse, the Enfield poltergeist case, and the Snedeker funeral home, one thing becomes disturbingly clear: these are not isolated incidents. Despite the miles and oceans between them, these hauntings share striking similarities, recurring themes that suggest something deeper may be at play. These patterns raise the terrifying possibility that certain locations, people, or energies may attract or even fuel something beyond explanation. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, these cases beg the question: are these places truly haunted, or is there a more human explanation behind the terror? In each of these stories, the activity often begins subtly. Doors creak open on their own. Lights flicker without cause. Cold spots appear in warm rooms. Small objects move, vanish, or break. It's as if something is testing the boundaries, toying with the family, almost playful at first. But then the energy shifts. These occurrences escalate, becoming aggressive. People report being touched, pushed, even attacked. Voices emerge, sometimes speaking in languages the residents don't know, or taking on sinister tones. And then, inevitably, someone in the house becomes the focus. Another recurring pattern is the centralization of activity around a specific family member. In Enfield, it was Janet. In Connecticut, it was Matt. In Amityville, George Lutz claimed to be the target. And in Harrisville, Carolyn Perron bore the brunt of the abuse. It's as if these entities choose a host, someone vulnerable, someone they can torment or possibly manipulate. Whether these are cases of psychological breakdowns under stress or actual possession is where the divide between skeptics and believers grows wider. The involvement of religious and spiritual figures is another common thread. Catholic priests were called into Amityville and Connecticut. The Warrens brought a deep belief in demonic forces and spiritual warfare to each case they investigated. And in each case, there was an attempt, whether through a blessing, seance, or full exorcism, to cleanse the home. But the results were mixed. Some families found peace afterward. Others continued to suffer. This inconsistency feeds the theory that these hauntings aren't just about the locations, they're about something that transcends walls and land. There's also the matter of the past. In every one of these stories, the haunting is tied to something historical, something violent or tragic. Amityville had the DeFeo murders. The Perron house had centuries of death and alleged witchcraft. The Enfield house had the ghost of a man who claimed to have died in the same chair still in the home. And the Snedeker house was built on the literal remnants of death, a funeral home with lingering spiritual trauma. These residual energies seem to linger, creating what some call thin places, locations where the veil between the living and the dead is weaker, allowing things to seep through. Skeptics, of course, offer different explanations. Sleep paralysis, group hysteria, mental illness, even carbon monoxide poisoning have been cited as possible causes for hallucinations and strange behavior. Critics argue that the influence of media, religion, and suggestion can cause families to see or hear things that aren't really there. The mind, after all, is a powerful tool, and when it's under pressure, grief, or fear, it can betray reality in terrifying ways. Still, not all the phenomena can be dismissed so easily. In each case, there were outside witnesses, neighbors, journalists, police officers, and researchers who had nothing to gain and no connection to the families. They saw furniture levitate, heard unexplained voices, and experienced events they couldn't rationalize. These testimonies give weight to the belief that something real and unexplainable was happening. What's more haunting than the idea of a ghost is the idea of a force with intelligence and intent, a malevolent entity that chooses when and how to appear, that studies its victims, waits for weakness, and then strikes. That's what makes these patterns so terrifying. They suggest that evil doesn't always wear a face or hold a weapon. Sometimes it hides in the shadows of a familiar home, behind smiling walls and beneath worn floorboards. It waits in silence, feeding on grief, fear, and trauma. The question that lingers is this: if these homes truly are haunted, is it the land, the structure, or the people that attract these forces? Can evil attach itself to a soul, a memory, or a bloodline? Or are these just tragic coincidences, given life by fear and the human need to explain the unexplainable? In the next section, we'll explore how these stories were adapted by Hollywood, what was changed, exaggerated, or fabricated, and what truth still echoes behind the screams on screen. There's something deeply fascinating about a horror story that claims to be true. It taps into a primal fear, the idea that the evil you see on screen might be waiting just outside your bedroom door. Hollywood has long capitalized on this allure, often beginning with the phrase, "based on a true story." But how much truth actually survives the leap from real-life accounts to the silver screen? When it comes to the 4 haunted houses we've explored, the truth is more complicated than fiction, blurred by sensationalism, financial interest, and the audience's hunger for fear. The most glaring example is the Amityville Horror, released in 1979. Marketed as a chilling recreation of the Lutz family's 28-day ordeal, the film brought the real-life horror into theaters and into the hearts of millions. But many details were either exaggerated or completely fabricated. For instance, the bleeding walls and demon pig Jody were dramatized to maximize shock value. While the Lutzes claimed many of these phenomena occurred, skeptics and even some involved in the film's production argued that the story had been manipulated for commercial success. Lawsuits were filed. Friendships broke down. Still, the film's success solidified the Amityville house as a pop culture icon of terror. Then came The Conjuring in 2013, inspired by the Perron family haunting. Director James Wan, along with screenwriters Chad and Carrie Hayes, worked closely with Lorraine Warren and the Perron family to shape the narrative. While the film captured the emotional core of the real events, Carolyn's torment, the farmhouse's violent history, and the Warrens' involvement, it also took creative liberties. For example, the climactic exorcism performed by Ed Warren never happened in real life. In fact, the Perrons said the Warrens' involvement, particularly the seance, may have made things worse. Andrea Perron, the eldest daughter, has both praised and critiqued the film, noting that while the atmosphere was accurate, much of what happened was far more complex and darker than any movie could portray. The Conjuring 2, based on the Enfield poltergeist case, took even more creative license. In reality, Ed and Lorraine Warren were only peripherally involved in the Enfield case, and many British investigators, who were the primary figures on the ground, felt the Warrens exaggerated their role. The film portrayed the haunting as demonic possession, adding a subplot with a character called the Crooked Man and the appearance of the demon Valak, dressed as a nun. These characters, while terrifying on screen, were entirely fictional. Yet, the film reignited public interest in the real case, prompting interviews with the now-adult Janet Hodgson and renewed scrutiny of the original evidence. The Haunting in Connecticut, 2009, based on the Snedeker family story, may be the most dramatized of all. The film depicted intense supernatural phenomena, body mutilations, and demonic manifestations that were never part of the original accounts. The screenwriters freely admitted to filling in narrative gaps with horror cliches to make the story work. Meanwhile, author Ray Garton, who was commissioned to write the book In a Dark Place with the Warrens and the Snedekers, later expressed discomfort with the process. He claimed the family's accounts were inconsistent and that Ed Warren encouraged him to make it scary. This admission cast a shadow over the entire narrative and called into question the motivations behind the hauntings portrayal. Despite these fabrications, or perhaps because of them, the films succeeded wildly. They captured the public's imagination, earned hundreds of millions at the box office, and spawned entire franchises. But with that success came criticism, especially from skeptics who argue that the blending of fact and fiction not only misrepresents real people's trauma, but also manipulates the audience into believing in things that may not exist. Yet, others defend the films, claiming that even if some elements were exaggerated, the core experiences of the families were genuine. After all, how do you accurately portray something as intangible as fear or as elusive as a ghost? Horror movies are storytelling devices, not documentaries. Their goal is not just to inform, but to haunt, to unsettle, to spark conversation. And if they inspire viewers to dig deeper into the real-life cases, perhaps they've done more than just entertain. Ultimately, the line between truth and hype in haunted house movies is razor thin. What begins as a terrifying personal account can morph into something unrecognizable by the time it reaches theaters. And for the families at the center of these stories, the spotlight can be both a blessing and a curse. They may feel validated, but they also risk having their pain turned into spectacle. So the next time you see the words, "based on a true story," flash across the screen, ask yourself, whose truth is being told? And how much of it was swallowed by the demands of the box office? After exploring these 4 infamous houses, each rooted in real-world terror, each inspiring some of the most chilling horror films of all time, you're left with a question that lingers like a shadow in a dark hallway. Would you dare step inside? Could you walk through the front door of the Amityville house, knowing that 6 people were murdered in their sleep within those very walls? Would you spend a night in the Perrone farmhouse, where a mother was allegedly targeted by a centuries-old spirit seeking possession? Could you sleep in the room where Janet Hodgson once levitated during the Enfield poltergeist haunting? Would you dare to descend into the basement of the old funeral home in Connecticut, where embalmings once took place and voices cried out from the dark? The real horror of these stories isn't in the jump scares or eerie cinematography, it's in the testimonies of the people who lived through them. Families torn apart by fear. Children psychologically scarred. Parents doubting their sanity. These weren't thrill seekers or paranormal investigators looking for ghosts. These were everyday people who found themselves at the mercy of something they couldn't explain. And perhaps that's what makes their experiences so haunting. Because if it could happen to them, could it happen to anyone? As we've seen, each of these hauntings shares common threads: violent pasts, spiritual vulnerability, and a slow descent into chaos. And while skeptics are quick to dismiss these stories as hoaxes, hallucinations, or media-fueled exaggerations, there's always that kernel of doubt, that sliver of mystery that refuses to be buried. Too many witnesses. Too many eerie coincidences. Too much trauma left behind. Even if only a fraction of what was reported is true, that fraction is enough to make the hairs on your neck stand up. We've also seen how Hollywood transforms these experiences, sometimes with care, sometimes with reckless dramatization. The phrase "based on a true story" has become both a marketing tool and a psychological weapon. It turns fear into entertainment and real suffering into box office gold. But behind every movie is a real family, a real house, and a story that, for them, never ended when the credits rolled. While the world moved on, they were left to pick up the pieces, haunted by memories far more disturbing than anything you'll see on screen. Some of the families featured in these stories have found peace. Others never really recovered. Some continue to speak publicly, trying to warn others or make sense of what they endured. Others refuse to ever speak about it again. And the homes? They're still there. The addresses may have changed. The interiors remodeled. The exteriors repainted. But to those who believe, a coat of paint can't cover what lives in the walls. You can't drywall over history or silence the energy that clings to tragedy. So, what do you believe? Are these simply old houses with dark pasts and overactive imaginations? Or are they windows into a world we don't fully understand? A world where trauma becomes tangible, where evil lingers, and where the veil between the living and the dead thins just enough for something to break through. The truth is, we may never fully know. And maybe that's the point. Because the most effective horror isn't the kind that gives you all the answers, it's the kind that leaves the door open. Just a crack. Just enough for the unknown to whisper through. So if you ever find yourself standing before one of these infamous homes, ask yourself again, would you go inside? Would you take that first step into the darkness? Or would you turn around grateful that, for now, the haunting is only something you've heard, not something you've lived? 88.